Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. Racism and witch hunts. That is the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. Writing in Time magazine, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a sincere man, opines about racism, quote, "The best way to combat racism in the face of selective attention and situational racism is to seek it out every minute of every day and expose every instance we find. And not just racism, but also sexism, homophobia, and every other kind of injustice," unquote. Although Mr. Abdul-Jabbar doesn't know it, that statement's dangerous. Because if his vision were to come true, we'd be a nation of witch hunters. I mean, who exactly is in charge of defining and exposing every instance of racism? Who? Do we set up a tribunal in Salem, Massachusetts? Sadly, this kind of thinking is now permeating the country. Americans are being punished for even donating money to causes some people don't like. Speakers are being canceled on college campuses if they don't uphold liberal orthodoxy or politically correct mandates. And race hustlers all over the place are branding people with whom they disagree with the R label. You want a divided nation? Let's keep this up. The reason Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was asked to write a column on racism is because of Donald Sterling, the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, who has now been banished from the NBA. As you know, Mr. Sterling made harsh comments about blacks. He's finished in the court of public opinion, but feels it necessary to continue to speak.
People are intimidated by even the thought of racism. And around the world, and this, they call me from Australia, from London, and they ask me, different media, "Are you a racist?" I'm not a racist.
In his heart, I'm sure Mr. Sterling believes that. But asking people not to bring black Americans to his basketball games is damning, no question about it. But as Talking Points said when the story first broke, it doesn't matter to this country. Donald Sterling's just one person. He doesn't reflect anything. A call for all Americans to seek and expose racism is quite something else. It's a vigilante situation. Again, that's dangerous. And if you study history, you know that's what totalitarian regimes do. Seek out opinions they don't like and punish them. It's apparent that political correctness has taken deep root in this country. Conservatives and Republican students are targets on some college campuses. They're objects of derision in much of academia. In the media, it's more of the same. Political correctness dominates. If the Fox News channel didn't exist, the traditional conservative voice would be buried in the media. We're one of the few networks that give both points of view and have not surrendered to PC nonsense. When I spoke with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar 2 weeks ago, I was impressed by his thoughtfulness. I think he's a good man. But his call to expose racism, homophobia, and every other kind of injustice would only lead to more injustice. Most Americans are good, fair people, and the flawed among us will eventually expose themselves. We don't need witch hunters. And that's the memo. Now, for the top story tonight, reaction with us here in the studio, Deneen Borelli, author of the book Black Lash. And from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, radio talk show host Richard Fowler. So where am I going wrong here, Mr. Fowler?
Well, I wouldn't go too far to say that it's a witch hunt, Bill, and thanks for having me, but I think it's more of a situation is what can we do in the status quo to make sure we put an end to remarks like Don Sterling or Clive Bundy or anybody like that, and we have to call them out. That's the only way you could do it. Whether it's homophobia, whether it's sexism, whether it's racism, we've got to call it out. We've got to point it out and show that it's there so we can overcome it, and I think that's the key here, Bill.
But who is in charge of telling everybody what, for example, sexism is? Who's in charge of homophobia? I mean, what we have here, Mr. Fowler, is if you oppose gay marriage on theological grounds, you're a homophobe. You're an anti-gay bigot. All right? That's what we're having now. So you must see the danger of this social vigilantism that's being called for.
Well, listen, Bill, I hear you, and I agree. I think social vigilantism isn't the way we do it. But I think if you can take a book from the pages of history, in the early 60s, when television started to become populated in every single home, you saw African Americans be attacked by dogs and fire hoses, and that's what rallied people to call it out, and we had a societal shift. And that just have to happen this time around. We have to have a societal shift, and it's a job of the society to determine what the norms are. And racism and homophobia and sexism racism aren't
look,
norms.
Bull Connor and his fascists down in the 60s, that was a fact. That was a visual fact. A lot of this stuff is subjective. All right, Deneen, you heard Kareem Abdul-Jabbar saying that you and me, we have to seek out racism. Right. We have to seek it out and expose it, almost like a campaign. What do you think?
Well, it is selective, and it's selective outrage. And when you think about his first appearance when he was on your show and when he wrote that first article, Bill, it's a difference of night and day. And what I think is that he is being attacked by his liberal friends for appearing on your program, for writing that first piece for Time magazine, and now he is doing an about face. Everything is about race. Everyone is racist. And his comments are really ridiculous, and they are harmful for the country.
Well, he, though, sincerely believes that the society is unfair. American society is unfair. Even though he said he loved his country and that he himself and his family were given a fair shake, and he did say that on The Factor 2 weeks ago. He does believe that a lot of people not in his circumstance don't get a fair shake. And I think he's entitled to that belief.
He's entitled to that belief, but here's the other thing. He doesn't go after NAACP, for example, for taking Don Sterling's money, for giving him a trophy for being this great All-American, and they knew that there were charges and charges against him from the federal government where he paid those fines. They had no problem putting him on their stage. And also,
Deneen,
Al Sharpton had no problem standing next to him for these events as well.
Right.
So I find his comments to be hypocritical.
And I think that's a good point, Mr. Fowler. I mean, you have a lot of reverse racism, all right? And Mr. Abdul-Jabbar is not calling that out. And if you want to be, you know, vigilant and correct social injustice, you've got to do it on both sides, do you not?
Oh, I completely agree there. I think when folks call out, when people make fun of Clarence Thomas's wife, we got to call it out. But where I disagree with Deneen is making it about organizations, institutions, and people, and it's broader than that. Just a couple hours ago, I visited my high school that I went to, and I saw systemic racism happening there. When there's not enough funding going to fund programs like debate and the arts in inner city schools, we have a serious problem, and we could all work to address that. We could agree that it needs to be addressed, and that is how we fundamentally change this country and end hatred and racism, by finding ways to end it systematically.
I will help your school if you tell me what school it is. If they're denied funding for extracurriculars, I'll make sure they get the funding.
But Bill,
because wait. Because if there is a school, a public school, in America that's being deprived of money because it's mostly minority students, we'll correct that wrong. But that's not the norm, Mr. Fowler. You know it's not the norm.
But that is the norm.
That's
happening in every major city across the country.
Is distribution, all right, on the federal and state level, equally among the schools, because the per capita spending is usually higher in the poor neighborhoods than it is in the affluent neighborhoods.
But hold on one second, Bill. A lot of school districts are determined by property tax. When you have a lower property value, you have a lower property tax, so you have less money going into the school.
You must know that the feds supplement that.
Of course they do.
Okay?
But it's not. But right. There's a distinction between a school in the suburbia and a school in the inner city.
If you think your old school is getting hosed, I'll write that wrong. You have the last word.
I believe that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's comments are just psychobabbling. When you look at how Americans are able to succeed and achieve, whether you're black, white, or otherwise, it's about hard work, personal responsibility, and overcoming whatever challenges might be before you. I've had people who didn't want me to get ahead and be where I am, or even be on this network, but I don't attribute it to being racist. I attribute it to people who are just being idiots.
That's the example of it.
I have a lot of people, Mr. Fowler, not wanting me on this network. Right? I mean, I get the Irish people. Come on.
But I mean, there might be African Americans that don't want you to network, and that's racism too, Bill. We got to call it out.
I don't see it that way. Maybe somebody doesn't like Ms. Borelli. It's impossible for me to understand that. She's a very nice person. But you can't always just knee-jerk it. I got to go. Right. Great debate. We appreciate you both. Next on the Rundown, New York Times.